这一集说故事的人有一部分的访谈是用英语进行的。您现在收听的是英语原音，如果需要中文配音的版本，请点选另一个单集。我身边有很多朋友，他们的孩子都是做出来的。他们常常会说，做试管或做人工受孕的过程对身体造成多大的负担。但我一直是看到了电视剧《未来妈妈》才了解，对很多人来说，生孩子不只是身体的负担很重，其实精神上的压力更大。但我最大的疑问是，为什么要生得这么辛苦呢？很想要孩子的话，去领养不就结了吗？你想要孩子，很多孩子需要父母，这不是刚刚好吗？为什么生一个自己的孩子会这么重要？血缘真的有这么神奇的力量吗？宗翰，我们上一集有提到，你跟你先生为了要生孩子，其实是真的非常不容易啊。那我相信这个问题也有很多人问过你了，但是我想再问你一次，为什么不考虑领养呢？
我自己有考虑，其实这在我们之中有不同的意见，但是我老公认为说，他希望这个孩子是有我们的血缘。那我觉得对他来讲有很多综合的因素考量，不管是有亲友告诉我们说，其实领养的孩子可能会在这个他成长的过程中背负着一种他原生家庭的命运，而且是不管国籍。我们听过德国的朋友分享，因为那个德国朋友家他的哥哥是巴西人，就是领养的。那还有台湾的朋友这种法律案例的分享，那包含我自己的妈妈也曾经告诉过我说，当他被姑姑领养的时候，虽然他感觉有了2个家，可是这2个家的连结都没有这么深。所以我觉得这些都在我们讨论的过程中成为了一个我们做决定或思考这件事情的方向。但是我自己是很希望可以领养一个孩子，也许一个亲生一个领养，就这件事情是对我来讲它不是一个定案，它是持续在思考中的一件事。
血缘这件事情，你觉得对你来讲重不重要？
我觉得不能说不重要，因为当我去看我的朋友或亲戚的小孩子的时候，我都会觉得说，他可能哪里像你啊，然后哪里是你的缩影啊。我觉得对于自己的下一代能够有自己的，不管是长相也好，个性也好，就是你看到一个迷你的自己，我觉得那会是一个不一样的感动。
可是你跟你先生这个孩子生下来，应该只能用到你们其中一个人的精子嘛，right？ 所以其实你只有一半的机会，会真正跟你的孩子有血缘的关系。你先跟我们讲一下这个过程好了。
这个过程就是我们2个人的精子都已经送去美国了。那送去美国之后呢，就会跟我们捐卵者的卵子做精卵结合嘛，形成胚胎。那不确定最后到底能够成功存活的或者是健康的胚胎有几个。那我们选择的方式就是让医生去决定哪一个胚胎最健康，不管性别，也不管是谁的基因，就把它生下来。
可是你如果生下来，你刚好没有轮到，这样要不要结？
其实我想过这个，因为我老公比我老嘛，比我大4岁，所以也许他可以先生一个他的小孩。如果我们有第2胎的话，就可以考虑我的。那如果最后都是我老公的也没有关系，因为我觉得我已经爱他到，我觉得这个小孩完全没有我的基因，他还是我的小孩的这种感觉。
即使你自己没有血缘，但是因为是你很爱的人有这个血缘，就也够了。
对，
可是还是要有血缘。
对我来说不一定，对我老公是。
今天说故事的人，我们要访问的 Barry Stevens， 对血缘有一个很特殊的观察角度。他是透过捐精生下来的孩子，他的生父就像我们上一集提到的阿瑞一样，是个超级捐精者。Barry 算过，他可能有1000个 兄弟姐妹。
孩子没有办法选择自己的出生，其实我也担心代孕生下来的小孩有一天会怨叹我为什么要把他生下来。我对于未来宝宝的担心，也许可以从一个人的身上找到答案。
Hi, my name is Barry Stevens. I'm 68 years old. I live in Toronto, in Canada. I'm a documentary filmmaker. And I am conceived by artificial insemination, what's normally called donor conceived. And I have many, many, many half siblings that I've discovered over the years.
我跟 Barry 约在 Skype 上面访谈，但是因为他电脑麦克风临时出了问题，所以改用手机跟我对谈，没有办法开镜头，看不到他的人。在英国出生长大的他，虽然是加拿大人，但声音听起来就像很多的英国绅士一样，讲话不急不徐，娓娓道来他的人生故事。他最近的纪录片作品也在公视主题之夜秀播出，叫做 World's Biggest Family， 讲述他找寻自己捐精父亲还有同父异母兄弟姐妹的故事。他也拍摄了其他捐精者生下的孩子，引起了广大的回响。
I suppose the title of that documentary was a little bit ironic because, of course, it isn't the same as a family that grows up together at all. I'm quite close to some of my half siblings, and I'm friendly with all of them, but it's not the same as the sister I grew up with from my birth all through my life. And she is also genetically my half sister, exactly like the others are genetically. But of course, it's very different. But that said, there are similarities between us, meaning the half siblings who were created by the sperm of the same man. And the similarities are striking. We have common interest in the experience of discovering that our paternity was not as we originally thought it was. That is to say, our fathers were not our genetic fathers. So we share this odd experience, but it's more than that. We also share similar styles of humor, of thinking, a tremendous amount of chattiness, I must say. And you can see this in contrast with my sister's family. My sister is also conceived by a sperm provider, but a different one. And her cohort, which numbers about a dozen half siblings from the same donor, they are very different. When you see us all together, as did happen once, it's striking. My sister and her family are all much quieter and more thoughtful, whereas my bunch are always talking over each other and being quite loud. It's just one of the minor differences that you can see immediately.
在那个年代，很多透过捐精捐卵生下来的孩子，并不知道自己是透过捐精捐卵生下来的。那时候流行的理论是怕小孩子心理受到影响，觉得自己跟别的小孩不一样。所以过去许多捐精或捐卵生下的小孩，几乎都是在长大之后才发现，除了自己认知的父母之外，还有基因连结的生理父母。像是 Barry， 就是在他18岁那年才得知他自己的身世。
Well, it was around Christmas in Montreal. And we were spending our first Christmas together without our father. He had died in an accident that summer. And my mother said she had something to tell us and sat us down. And I guess it was probably Christmas Eve or something. I don't remember. But it was around Christmas. And yeah, it was a shock. I mean, it was not a shock like, not a terrible, painful thing, just sort of, well, didn't expect that. And then, you think, well, I wonder who it was, who the guy was. And right away, we were told we could never know who it was. So I just kind of accepted that. I thought it was kind of cool in a way. I mean, when you're 18, you like things which make you special. And I thought it was kind of cool that I was, a test tube baby and one of the first one of the first human beings produced by science and not sex. So I thought, cool, I'm the start of something. And for a long time, it's funny, sometimes I'd tell people, like very rarely, I'd tell like a girlfriend, I'd say, well, it's something interesting. I don't actually, because I was produced by sperm donation, and nobody really was very interested. And then suddenly in the 90s, it was like, oh my God, people were really interested. There was a cultural shift. It was strange. I'm not quite sure why that happened or whether it's relevant.
很多国家的法律规定，捐精捐卵的人要匿名，像台湾就是。我想，这应该是为了要减少将来的法律纠纷，所以才这样设计的吧？怕未来的子女找上门要遗产，或是捐精捐卵的人跑来抢小孩之类的。Barry 就是透过匿名捐精生下来的，所以当 Barry 想要找出他的生理父亲时，并不容易，花了很多功夫，最后才确定他的父亲是英国生物学家维斯纳。维斯纳跟他的妻子巴顿1940年代在伦敦开设生育诊所，专门帮不孕夫妇提供高智商男士捐出来的精子来进行人工受孕。这个诊所一直经营到1960年代，后来他们销毁了所有的医疗记录，让这些婴儿在长大之后没有办法追查生父的身份。Barry 是透过基因检测跟网络连结，才发现自己可能有600甚至到1000个兄弟姐妹。我问 Barry， 他跟其他维斯纳捐精生出来的子女是怎么样看待他们这个生理父亲呢？
There is perhaps a division in the group, or where some people who think it's very cool, who want to find out all kinds of things about the biological father, who was a brilliant scientist. So some of them want to know all about Bertolt Wiesner and find out about him. He's long dead. And others don't like him very much, think he was unethical, irresponsible. And my brother David, who's in the film, who's the one I'm closest to, I've known the longest, he and I together solved the mystery 20 years ago of who the donor was. And David is much more in the camp of doesn't like him, doesn't approve of him. And this has sometimes caused some discussion or dissension within the group. I myself, kind of in the middle. I neither condemn him nor adore him. I find him interesting. And it's clear, one of the things that happens for me is that some things about me, about how my mind works, about my personality, perhaps even, I can see coming from him. It was like a distant mirror to my own self, finding out who he was. And I think that's a good image, a mirror from long ago. And that mirror also happens between siblings to some extent. But, I think it's a good thing. I found out in middle age when I'm already formed as a person. So it wasn't like that disruptive. It's just kind of, oh, that's interesting. I find it fascinating, but I don't have a huge emotional charge myself, either positive or negative towards the donor, that some people do.
对 Barry 来说，他把自己的寻父过程扩大为一项拍摄计划，去了解其他捐精者生下的人对自己的身份有什么看法。这也迫使他去思考，到底自己跟养父和生父的关系是什么。
Sometimes journalists in the old days would ask me, well, who's your real father? Meaning the biological father. And it's very interesting that people think of it that way. And if you think in the English language, the verb to father means to have sex with a woman that produces a child. To mother in English is a whole range of behaviors. Mostly the word means to nurture, to care for, to raise a child, to love. And it's very interesting. Those two words are so different in their meaning. But for me, I always had to correct those journalists and say, no, my real father was my father. He's not biologically related to me, but he's my father. He was my father. And I think most of us feel that. Some of us feel wounded and angry about the secret being held from us. And Perhaps this is less true for me because my mother told us, and then I chose to go on a quest to figure out who the guy was. So in a way, I kind of dragged people along or pulled people into this who didn't necessarily have a choice, and therefore perhaps it's more painful for them.
他在纪录片当中提到自己跟爸爸的关系不亲，两个人之间好像总是隔着一层薄雾，直到妈妈解谜身世，他才恍然大悟，那些年跟爸爸之间的隔阂其来有自。
Yeah, well, I did interview my mother after I found my brother and began to identify who the donor was. And she said, yeah, the whole thing was difficult because there was a secret. And the secret, in a sense, blocked intimacy in the family. It was this thing that there's a lie at the core of the family. The children don't know, and the parents do know. So that creates something of an untruth. And I think it affected my father. It's hard to say that, of course, because fathers of that generation from my country, because I was born in England, I'm Canadian, but I was born in England. And England at that time, fathers tended to be more distant anyway. It was a different kind of model. It's common, I think, in many places that the father is more distant to the children. Nevertheless, I can't help feeling that the particular way in which my father held back, he didn't, as I would say it, fully inhabit the role of being a father as I might have wanted. But, you know, I loved him. And he was a great guy. He was a great guy.
我也问了他跟妈妈的关系是不是有受到这个事件的影响。
Well, she was very courageous after my father died to tell us the truth. And I think it was probably because she was a bit lonely in grief, missing her husband, that she told us. And a psychiatrist told us that we must know that something was wrong. We didn't know. I appreciate that very much. It made me closer to her. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure the difficulties I had with my mother, you know, any difficulties we might have had really didn't have to do with that. But yeah, I think it was a burden for her. I think it was a real burden for her, much more than it was for me as a child before I knew. I guess what we feel as donor offspring, politically, you might say, or legally, is that we feel we have a right to our own story, that we have a right to the truth. And this is not about, oh, it might harm us to know the truth, or it might help us to know the truth. That's really, you know, it's not a therapeutic decision. It's a question of rights. And does one have the right to know the truth of one's own origins?
这个藏在家中的潮湿秘密逐渐发霉，让家人的感情变质。此外 Barry 也认为这不只是个别家庭的问题，所以他决定把触角延伸到整个捐精和捐卵的产业。他认为不诚实跟不透明很可能会造成各种不幸悲剧。
Most sperm banks say they have various limits. The American Society of Reproductive Medicine has something like no more than 10 children per 800,000 community, which is ridiculous because people move all over the place. I don't know, I'd have to calculate how many children that would mean in the United States, but it's a lot. So there are ridiculous so the sperm banks and the profession, the medical profession, do put some limits on it, but it's a limit more honored in the breach. By what I mean by that is that they break their own rules all the time and they lie about it. Very recently, there was a case that came up of an egg donor who discovered she had a genetic illness. And what she had done is to pay for her own treatment, she had donated a lot of her eggs to the clinic. They do this. It's called egg sharing. You hyperstimulate the woman, produce a lot of eggs, some of which get fertilized and make a child for her, but some of which, to pay for that very expensive treatment, she donates her eggs to this clinic, and they keep them frozen, and they use them for women who can't have them, who can't produce them. So she called up the clinic, said, I've got this illness. Were there any children? She said, oh, no, there were no children. And then she goes on donor sibling registry or some other means and finds that she does. She does have, and there are lots of lawsuits and lots of things. Sperm donor clinics have lied to their sperm donors, saying, oh, don't worry, you'll only have 5 children in Oregon, which is where this guy was. And then it turns out he has, because of the direct-to-consumer DNA sites that's popping up, all the truth is popping up everywhere, that he has about 25 or 30, he doesn't know how many. And he wanted them only on the East Coast because he was in Oregon. And it turns out one of them is even going to school in the same class as his daughter.
Barry 的纪录片逼得整个捐精跟捐卵产业要直面这些问题。他要求不该再有任何的匿名制度。我问 Barry， 纪录片拍出来之后，是否成功影响了捐精捐卵产业，让他们负起更多的责任？
Oh, I don't know. I doubt it. Frankly, maybe. It seems that donor offspring are on Facebook pages, they're connecting with each other because of these direct-to-consumer DNA tests like Ancestry and 23andMe. They're finding each other all over the world. But it seems to be very much on a personal level that they connect. Oh, this is my story. Oh, nice to meet you. You know, don't seem that interested in changing the law or challenging the powerful interests. Now, this varies from country to country. Australia is very active, and Britain did change the law. So just like adopted children, donor offspring do have access to the identity of their donor going forward into the future. And in Australia, it's even retrospective in one case. But not the United States, not Canada, not France. So it varies. They are changing because they have recognized that the direct-to-consumer DNA tests have just blown it open. So what they tell their donors now is that they cannot guarantee their anonymity. They're starting to do that. Now, there are still some clinics and some doctors who haven't caught on, but the big ones are starting to say that. Some of them actually refuse to accept donors that aren't willing to be identifiable. What's behind it is that in order to do this kind of work, from a practical business point of view, it's much easier to deal with bits of human tissue in a fridge and computer files. Much easier to deal with that, and somebody comes in to be inseminated. It's clinical, it's clean, bang, they're out. At the end, they get a baby, job done, money in the bank. But a human relationship, an ongoing human relationship with people who have needs and desires and complexity, that's not what they deal with. Partly because you don't want to think about it. In order to do this work, you have to cut off the identity of the donor, and you have to put that egg into a different woman, or you have to inseminate a woman with sperm from a man she's never met. And the whole thing is just, it's weird and it's unusual. It's not the standard way human beings have been made for hundreds of thousands of years.
一个跟生命有关的产业居然这么害怕面对人。听他分享完，我自己也感觉忧心忡忡，不晓得自己的代孕抉择是对还是错。这时候很恰巧，他的镜头居然打开了，出现在我面前的已经不是纪录片当中的黑发壮年男子，而是胡须鬓白、慈眉善目的老人家。他开始像关心晚辈一样询问我代孕的历程。我告诉他，我们听了前辈的建议， 基于健康的理由，选择基因跟我们比较遥远的白人与拉丁人混血的捐卵者，目前正在配对的阶段。
Yeah, sure. Called hybrid vigor sometimes. Yeah, I'm a believer in that. It's sort of the opposite of the Nazi viewpoint that you should be as racially pure as possible, which of course is not been the case in my life since I'm half English ethnically and half Jewish. But for gay couples, it have always been more open. And in fact, in the States, the first sperm bank, which allowed sperm donors to be identifiable to their children, their offspring, was a lesbian collective in California. And they were the first in the world in the 1980s, along with Sweden. Yeah, because if you're a lesbian couple and you have a child, then the question is, okay, how do you get the child? And if you're a gay male couple, the same question. So the openness, there's no point in lying to your child. So right away, that's one barrier which I think you won't have. You can't have. So you'll be telling the truth. And then in addition, of course, she won't or he won't look quite like you because Hispanic Caucasian. The other thing I would say is that I hope that the child may want to know. I hope you'll be, open with the child, and the child may want to know and eventually have a connection with, a relationship with, possibly the egg donor, the biological mother, and the gestational mother, both. It's quite possible. In fact, at some point in her life, she may want to go there, or they may want to come to you. That would be, I think, something for you to consider, perhaps not in the early years, but later on.
想起来真的是很奇妙的交集。Barry 是捐精者生下的小孩，而我跟我老公正在寻求捐卵者的帮助，这促成了一段很特别的对话，我们也产生了某种连结。既然这么有缘分，我也想深入他的内心，听听他如果有机会再见到两个爸爸，会想对他们说些什么。
Well, I'd be quite emotional, wouldn't it? I mean, to speak to my father, who's been dead this half century, I would say it would just be incredible to see him again. And to say, I know about this, and I'm sorry you weren't able to feel that you could tell me. And it would make no difference. Knowing the truth would make me feel better. I also would say, quite apart from donor insemination, I'd say, you died when I was 18, and now I'm an old man. And I'm almost as old as you were when you died. And I would, I've had quite an interesting life. And I wish that you'd been around longer so that I would have gotten to know you as a mature man. But I love you. And I appreciate you. With respect to what I'd say to Wiesner, the sperm donor, say you're a bit of a rascal, huh? I mean, really? 600 children? You think that's okay? But at the same time, I'd want to hang out with him and just spend an evening with him and listen to what he had to say. If he's interested in me, he can ask. I'd certainly tell him. I'd tell him that I was quite proud of the fact that I was the one who figured out who he was. So I was proud of solving the mystery. I figured out who you were, buddy. Yeah. It's like I'm a detective who's been on the trail of a serial killer for years, and I finally meet him, I arrest him. Except he's not a killer, he's a producer. But so yeah, he's like a serial killer, but he's a serial creator.
《说故事的人》是由范琪斐的美国时间与实在影像共同制作，与百灵果 News 协同制作。制作人是范琪斐，企划是林瑞珠，这集主持是范琪斐，记者是邹宗翰，导演剪辑是王博安，执行制作张燕玲，混音是赵仁俊。特别感谢公视主题之夜的协助。如果你喜欢说故事的人，请在 Apple Podcast 给我们5星好评，并且订阅分享给你的朋友。说故事的人，我们下周见。